Oh.
Stanley. Stanley.
Look at all that Stanley.
Stanley.
Okay. Oh,
Stanley.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking outside the map. Oh no! Oh no!
Stanley.
Oh no, no.
Stanley. Stanley.
Oh my gosh, it's actually a rocket, oh my gosh. Ow, stop that. You're not supposed to explode in walls. No, I want my teleport.
Stanley.
Stanley. I'm a bird. Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley.
Oh gosh, fly into the ceiling. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh, ow. Ow. Killing myself is painful. Oh my gosh. Why are you the entire height of the room?
Stanley.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wait, I don't know. Oh god. No. Let me through. Why can't I open and close doors? This is confusing. I didn't put that cheat in.
Stanley.
Okay. Oh god. Stop closing the door on me. Why can't I open and close doors? This is confusing.
Stanley.
Stanley. Ow. That hurts. Stanley. Ooh, Stanley. Oh my gosh. This game is so awesome. Stanley. I'm crouching in midair.
Stanley.
Oh gosh.
Stanley.
Finally, Stanley. Oh, Stanley, yay, Stanley. Whoops, Stanley. At the door, Stanley. No, I want to go to that store. Stanley. I'm crouching in the
Stanley.
Stanley. At the door. Stanley. That's Stanley. Oh my god.
Stanley.
Ow. Stanley. Oh my gosh, I can spam project. Ow.
Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley, what Oh no, Stanley! Stanley! There aren't any bots? Can I add bots? I want to add bots! Oh my gosh, am I still floating? I'm not still floating, am I? Bind. Bind. To bind. I'm a bird again. No. Bind.
Stanley.
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 Stanley. Oh my gosh, why does this door keep being able to open and close? It's so creepy and weird. Oh my gosh, stop it. Let me open the door. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Wait, why are there so many doors?
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. I got to even have like collision detectors.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Jason. 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 Stanley. 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 Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Oh. Oh jeez. Oh my gosh, there's so many doors. I don't know what to do. Oh my gosh, I don't remember this at all. Spray. Spray. Can I bind spray to a key? I want to bind spray to a key. Stanley. Stanley. Jump, 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 jump. Oh. Ow. That hurt. Oh my gosh, there's a... what the fuck? Wait, what? Oh my gosh. Space just keep going. Oh my gosh, there's not even lights anymore. Where's the adventure line? Stanley. 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 There's another dark corridor. I want to go down it. Stanley. 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 Did I just go in a
Stanley.
circle? I may have just gone in a circle. Or they have some really cool teleport abilities. Oh my gosh, Stanley. Oh my gosh. Oh my god. I'm through.
Stanley.
No, I want to go through. Oh no, oh my gosh, Stanley. Stanley, I want to add bots. I can add bots. Bot adding. Bot adding.
Stanley.
Bot adding.
Stanley.
Stanley. But, I'm a bird again. Because Stanley. Stanley. Oh no, I turned... Why does everything I touch die? Stanley. Stanley. Oh my gosh, what's this person even doing in there? Oh my gosh, they're fixing the roof. I don't know. But why fix... Oh my gosh. Stanley. What?
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. That kills people. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh, are we heading back or something? Stanley. 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 What's that store here? Just get no number on it. Oh,
Stanley.
Stanley. That kills people. Stanley. There's no. Oh my god.
Stanley.
Stanley. Oh, Stanley. 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 Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Oh, wait, is there something in there? I thought it said something through the... Oh my gosh, I'm actually going partial. Oh my gosh, what is that? Oh, yeah, it was coming for me.
Stanley.
It was coming for me. Everyone saw it, right? Everyone saw it, right? It's Stanley.
Stanley.
Oh, yay! Dum bum 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 bum. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. But while Stanley was in Stanley, he unwittingly Stanleyed. Oh no, said Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. So many buttons I can't use. No, I'm not gonna follow it. Wait, why is it going that way? What? Gosh, I don't... I'm walking away from it. Nope. Adventure line's gonna screw me over. Up.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Now shut the door, Stanley. Now, Stanley. What you doing now, Stanley? Why can't I shut these doors, Stanley? Stanley. 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 Oh my gosh, Stanley. I can stand. I'm a bird. I'm a plane. I'm a tall mountain, actually.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. I didn't get any sort of, well, this is interesting. Stanley. Oh my gosh. Why is it going places? What?
Stanley.
What? Stanley. 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 Oh my gosh. I'm gonna go down. I'm gonna go on. Come on.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Oh my gosh.
Stanley.
Can I shut the door? No, I can't. Stanley. Stanley. Oh my gosh. Stanley. Stanley. Boom. Stanley. 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 Stanley.
Stanley.
Maybe if I bind mouse 4 and teleport player. Oh god, get me back on the floor. Thanks much. Whoa.
Stanley.
Uh-oh. It's going everywhere. It's an adventure launcher everywhere. Oh! Oh my gosh. What? Oh my gosh. I'm scared. Stanley. I'm scared. Oh my gosh. I'm scared. Oh my gosh. I'm scared. Stop right here. Head back.
Stanley.
Now we need to remember that fern. I already know. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Wait.
Why are you so tall up?
I'm a bird. That is why. Stanley.
I want to play this game.
Yes, Stanley. I know. We
I've
all
never
Stanley
played it
want to
before.
play it. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Why are you a bird?
Stanley.
And shooting
Because
force?
Stanley.
What did you say?
Stanley. Oh my
Stanley.
gosh, Stanley. It's the end of the Stanley.
No, what is it? What are you shooting? What does it say?
Error. It's just
Oh.
backwards. Stanley. It would
that
look
was
right
map.
ways if I was in front of it. I mean, if it was coming for me, it would totally be Stanley. I mean, error. Stanley. I'm a bird. But I'm a bird. Not I'm a bird. I'm a special bird.
Stanley.
Why'd you do that? Dude, that was creepy. Creepy and scary.
Stanley.
What? Are you like running from
Oh my gosh.
zombies? What is so
I don't know.
creepy?
I don't know. This game itself is creepy. And it's Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. I know, Stanley. 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 Can't create mixers. Stanley. Maybe if I go back in the room. No, I can't. Why can't I go? Oh. 437, Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. I'm sure we're getting somewhere, Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley? Oh my gosh, it is. Oh god, it stopped. Stanley. 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 Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley, I want to Stanley through the window. Stanley, where'd you come from, Stanley?
Stanley.
Stanley saw the Stanley line and followed the Stanley line towards Stanley. And then suddenly Stanley was surprised.
Stanley.
Stanley. Alright, I know this one. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Oh, I got Stanley. 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 Oh, I got Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Oh, I got Stanley. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. The Stanley. Stanley's the Stanley. 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 The Stanley. Stanley's the Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Europe. Ow. Close. Didn't even notice. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. No, look at this. Guess we start nerve gets throughout
Stanley.
previous strikes. You were playing the Confusion ending for 16 minutes. Oh my gosh. Look at all the motion blur. Holy cow. I'm gonna like get wander in the blackness, find a bookstore, get bored and leave.
Stanley.
Narrator starts the game. What?
Stanley.
How is that supposed to make sense? After a long time, Stanley dies. Narrator starts the game. Find the line again. Begin following the line. Find an identical replica of the office has begun to deteriorate. I tend to make up a story here.
Stanley.
Awesome. That's a great idea. Stanley attempts to play the story, but is prevented, unable to go anywhere, do anything. Game restarts on its own.
Stanley.
Narrator. I don't want to forget everything, says Stanley. But we're all Stanley. Everybody's a Stan. Oh my gosh, there's a chair. I gotta sit in the chair then. Sit in the chair. Sit in the chair. I'm in the chair.
Stanley.
Whoa. What? 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 What's going on?
Stanley.
What's even going on, Stanley? I don't know, Stanley. I don't know. Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley.
Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Stanley. Ow. Ow, I don't want to die. Did I die? I died. Oh, no, Stanley. Oh, Stanley.